Welcome to the Farm Progress virtual experience. Today, the grain bin safety session, which is being sponsored by Nationwide, and we're talking with Brad Liggett, president of Nationwide Agribusiness. Brad, welcome, and thank you for your support of this breakout session at the event. Question for you is, Nationwide has a long history of serving the agriculture industry and community. Can you share a little bit more about the company's grain bin safety advocacy efforts?
Yeah, absolutely, Willie. And first off, thanks for having us and helping us bring attention to this very important issue. We were founded by farmers. Nationwide was. Our roots are in agriculture, and quite frankly, being in insurance, we tend to be around a lot of the accidents that happen, when things go wrong on the farm or in the ag community. Insurance is involved in a lot of that, and we started seeing such a large number of fatalities or serious injuries that were coming from grain entrapment. And in 2014, which is now 6 years ago, we just said, boy, this is just something that happens every year. We have got to bring a focus to it. We've got to bring attention to it. So we leaned in as a company using organizations like yourself, using media, using attention we could do to bring the perils that are out there around grain entrapment.
Great. And I think you've been involved with a rescue tube program. Talk to me about that. How many rescue tubes have you been able to deliver to fire departments around the country?
Yeah, what we do is we started out by saying, hey, there's this need out there. Let's get the communities involved. So people nominate their local fire department. You go out and nominate your local fire department. And then what we do is we sit down with NECAS, which is the National Education Center for Ag Safety, and we pick winners every year. It's a drive, it's a campaign. We get funds from the ag community, people donate, Nationwide, we all donate, and then we decide how many tubes we can put out there into the community. And these rescue tubes, if anybody's ever been around like a local volunteer fire department, it's one thing for them to have the tube and another thing for them to have the training. Because how to use those, because you can imagine getting that call, hey, we've got somebody trapped in a grain bin. If you're that local fire department, you want to help, you need to know how to help. So, and the worst thing people can do really is just cut a hole in the side of the bin. It actually just makes it worse, and that's what we used to think you needed to do. The reality is you need to build a tube around the trapped person, suck the grain out from around them, and then extract them. And we have been fortunate since 2014 that we've been able to donate 152 rescue tubes to 152 fire departments across America.
Well, kind of a tough question I wanted to ask you. Are you aware of any lives that might have been saved by this effort and the training that you've been able to donate?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a big deal to us and the good folks at NECAS every year when we hear, and we've had 4 lives saved that we know of. We've had 4 fire departments come back and say, hey, we were able to save someone thanks to this material, thanks to the training that you all gave us.
Well, great. I really appreciate that, Brad. And we're looking forward now to our session on grain bin safety here, the Farm Progress virtual experience. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
Absolutely. Please, most important thing, we can talk about tubes and how we rescue people. One of the most important things that I'd ask farmers and those in this industry to understand is how dangerous the environment they're going in. The best solution is we don't need to rescue someone from entrapment. They understand, hey, I'm going into something. There could be holes under your vacuums underneath there. That grain is not stable. Harness up. Don't go in alone. Do lockout, tag out. There's a whole lot of great information about how to avoid this happening at thinkgrainbinsafety.org. So make sure you get out to that website. Nominate your fire departments. We will continue this program of getting important rescue tubes and trainings out to fire departments, but also really think through how you can avoid getting in that situation in the first place.
Great. Thank you very much, Brad.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Farm Progress breakout session on grain bin safety. I'm Willie Vogt with the Farm Progress virtual experience, and I'm happy to welcome today 2 speakers that can delve into this situation, and also a program that's Nationwide is involved in that takes part and helps with this whole program. First up today will be Dan Neenan. He's with the National Education Center for Agricultural Safety. He's going to talk about the issue of grain bin safety and things I think farmers should really be paying attention to. And then he'll be followed up by Jade Rodemeyer with Nationwide, who will talk about a very interesting and special program that company's involved with on this very issue. So Dan, why don't you take it away and share some insights on grain bin safety?
All righty. Well, welcome to the program. As we start getting into the fall, of course, we're going to be working with bins. Unfortunately, this year, one of the issues we're dealing with is we've still got a lot of grain stored from last year that's going to need to be moved. And unfortunately, it's not the best quality grain, which may not flow out of the bin. So we need to be really careful of that this fall as we're emptying out last year's harvest and getting ready to go for this year. So by OSHA standards, a grain bin is considered a confined space. Now, if you're a family farm, 10 employees or less, you are exempted from OSHA rules. However, these would be best practices for entering into the bin. So it's large enough and configured that an employee can enter and perform work. Yep, that's a bin. Limited means getting in and out. Yep, that's a bin as well. Not designed for continuous human occupancy. So last week it was in the 90s all week long. So what's the temperature in the bin at the end of the week? 125, 130, no air movement in there whatsoever, okay? So permit required confined space, okay? So a grain bin does enter into that because it does has the capability of having a hazardous atmosphere, and it does have the potential to engulf somebody. So several years ago now, a father and a son were killed in a bin. They weren't trapped by the grain. They actually had a fire in the bin the day before, and the fire put itself out because it ran out of oxygen, okay? So they went in to check for the damage. There was not oxygen content in there, but there was 500 parts per million of carbon monoxide in there. And if you have a carbon monoxide detector at your house, that will start alarming generally at 35 parts per million. So the day after the fatalities, there were still 500 parts per million of carbon monoxide in that bin. So we want to fill out a permit before we head in there. I like to view that permit as a cheat sheet because I might not go in maybe once in the spring, once in the fall, and I can't remember everything. So that permit gives me a cheat sheet of what I need to do to be able to go in and make sure that I go in, or my business partner is going in safely. So we want to complete the permit for each form. So what confined space are we entering? Who is entering? What is my oxygen content? What is my carbon monoxide? What's my LEL or lower explosive limit? Could that be a problem? Okay. What time did we go in? What time did we go out? Did we lock out and tag out the power source to the auger? That's going to be one of the most common ways that folks get trapped into the bin. So again, I view that permit as a cheat sheet to remind me what I need to do to be able to come out of that bin safely. Okay, so we're going to enter and perform the work. So that being said, we need to lock out and tag out. We need to check for air quality sampling. Everybody needs to be wearing a harness that goes in. And then the rule that's broken the most going into a bin is we need to have a minimum of 2 people. So one person that's entering into the bin, and then one person who's stationed just outside the entrance, and that's their one and only job, is to watch what's going on inside the bin. And if that person becomes unconscious or becomes trapped, it's not the attendant's job to go in after them. It's the attendant's job to call for 911. Think about it with your location. How many bins do you have? So we need to be having the fire department directed in to which bin the victim is located in. So lockout tag out, here's our definition for lockout tag out: to physically ensure that all mechanical or electrical systems can be energized, started up, or release stored energy are secured, isolated, disabled, and rendered inoperative. And then it's tagged out. So I'm going to write a tag on there that Dan Neenan locked it out, today's date, today's time. Okay. Now, we need to do that to ensure that the auger cannot be turned on when we're inside. Okay. Because if the auger is turned on when we're in the bin, it can pull us to our waist in 15 seconds and completely submerge us within about 30 seconds. Okay. Thing to remember and do a little education on here is a lot of times maybe the family farmer is the one who did the wiring, to the farm. And if we take a look there, we've got a lot of extra materials in the electrical panel. The cover's missing. There are no labels on there to tell us what each switch is for. So I have a challenge for you. The next rainy day that you can't get out into the field, clean that out, blow it out, find the cover, put it back on, and with a permanent marker, write down what each one of those switches are for. What did I just cost you? Just a little bit of time on a day that you couldn't do anything with, okay? But it could be critical, if somebody's trapped into a bin, to make sure that we have that power shut off. We need to do air quality sampling then to make sure we've got at least 19.5% oxygen inside that bin. Now, remember, with a 4-gas detector, I can't just reach in as far as I can from the ladder and say, yep, it's good, because those deadly gases are typically heavier than air, and they're going to be located down toward where the grain is located at. And so I needed to actually take and clip that right on my harness. That way I know when I'm getting myself into trouble. So a lot of different gas monitors that are out there. Work through your local suppliers. Typically, what we're going to be sniffing for is oxygen, LEL, again, which is your lower explosive limit, carbon monoxide, and hydrogen sulfide. So if you've got manure pits, the hydrogen sulfide is what you're looking for there. That can be causing you some difficulties, okay? So with the gas monitors, we want to read the oxygen levels on there. And remember, no instrument is truly instantaneous. So there's always a delay of at least 5 to 10 seconds from what it's sniffing to what it's telling you. So you want to be aware of that and understand that if it starts alarming, you've already been in that situation for 5 to 10 seconds and need to work on retreat and getting back out. Again, as we take a look, most of the poor oxygen is down toward the bottom because it's heavier than air. So we always want to make sure that we're aware of that. And we always want to test the oxygen prior to every entry when the space is vacant, at least hourly if it's a permit required confined space, or more frequently if the conditions are suspicious in that area. So with that, again, I would like to take the monitor and put it right on my harness. That way it is sniffing the air right where I'm located at in the bin, okay? And if I have to recharge the battery when I come out, I have to recharge the battery. That's fine. So we want to test the atmosphere in this order. You want to check for your oxygen content and then for combustibles. One thing to remember is that you need, when you're checking for your oxygen or when you're first turning it on and doing your bump test, it needs to be in clean oxygen. Okay, you don't want to do it next to a diesel truck or tractor to be able to do that, because if it has an off reading for your oxygen, that's going to throw off the reading for your combustible gases as well. So you want to make sure that you've got good, clean oxygen when you turn it on and you do your bump test. That way we're going to check for the LEL and then check for any toxic gases that are going to be there. So remember, there is always the capability of a grain dust explosion there. So we want to make sure to keep the dust limited to what we're doing. And, if we do have the fans running and inside it's really, really dusty, we want to make sure that we're not adding a spark to be able to do that, because you have to have the proper oxygen content and the proper spark, and then you can have an explosion with that grain dust. Carbon monoxide is known as the silent killer. It's the silent killer because we can't see it, we can't smell it, but at 50 parts per million, that's your maximum over an 8-hour period that you can take in. But if we take a look at that at 200 parts per million or 600 parts per million, when they talk about headache, how many of us think of carbon monoxide when we get a headache? How many think it's been a bad day, or I shouldn't have eaten that last night, or shouldn't have drinking that last night? So that's why carbon monoxide is known as the silent killer. So when we start talking about grain, we're going to talk about the 4 main ways that folks get trapped into a bin. The first, which is the most common and unfortunately the most fatal, is to get into the bin with the auger running. You'll be pulled to your waist in 15 seconds and completely submerged within 30 seconds. So how long does it take us out of those first 15 seconds to realize we're getting in trouble? Maybe 15 seconds, okay? So we holler for help. That 10-inch auger is running, and our attendant, who's supposed to be up top watching, had things to do on the ground, so they got down to the ground. Are they going to hear us hollering with that 10-inch auger running? Probably not. Second of all, we pull out our cell phone. Are we going to get a tower when we're inside of that metal bin? Again, the answer might be no to that. Okay. So the thought process for years and years is let's go in and let's grab somebody who's trapped in the grain and pull them out of there. Okay. So if we take a look here, if you take a 165-pound person and trap them to their waist, it's going to take 325 pounds of upward pressure to be able to pull them up. And if I'm trapped to my neck, 625 pounds of pressure, to be able to pull them up. That being said, am I going to pull somebody's arm right out of their socket trying to pull them with that much pressure? Yeah, I am. So the grain rescue tubes, there's about 7 of them that are commercially available on the market. We're going to get the fire department there. We're going to get that tube placed around them, sink it down around them, and evacuate the grain from the inside until the victim comes loose by themselves. So that's with the auger on. So if we take a look here, most of your family farm bins typically have one auger underneath with a sump. And when that gets turned on, it's going to pull grain straight down. The human, being the heaviest thing in there, is going to get pulled down as well. So here we can see on the slide, he gets pulled down and he's trapped just about up to his shoulder level here. If we put a rescuer in right now onto the grain to get to him, we may push that grain over the top of his head, which we don't do. So we want to be very careful as we're entering into the bin to be able to perform a rescue. 2010 was the worst year on record in America for grain engulfments and fatalities. Unfortunately, I think 2020 might eclipse that because we're really close in our numbers. But if we remember from the 2009 harvest, it was late being harvested and it was put away with a high moisture content. What do you remember from last year's harvest? Kind of the same thing. So we've really seen a lot of engulfments and unfortunately a lot of fatalities to go along with that. So we fill the bin from the top, we empty it from the bottom. What happens in the Midwest in January and February? It gets cold and it freezes and that grain crusts over at the top. So as we empty it out from the bottom, we'll get a void area, and that void area may be 3 feet deep, or that void area could be about 30 feet deep. And as somebody walks across there, it can't support their weight and down they go. So now they've got injuries from the fall, they're trapped, and what's going to happen when we put rescuers into the bin? We're going to drop some more crusted grain on top of them. Conversely from that, grain stops coming out the bin, so the farmer goes in thinking it's empty, but there's grain crusted along the side, so he'll take a pole or a shovel to try to knock it loose. And once he gets it loose, it's going to avalanche down upon him. Okay. The other thing that we're starting to see is kind of a new emerging trend is you've all heard of the dangers of texting and driving, right? Well, have you thought about the dangers of texting and using a grain vacuum? So if we're inside that bin with a grain vac, you ever notice there's places with your cell phone that you can't get out with a call, but you can send and receive a text message? A bin is one of those places. So if he's vacuuming and he gets a text message and he pulls out his phone and he reads it and he's going to respond to it, what does he do with the hose? Typically, he puts it in the grain at his feet and it's sucking grain and pulling him down the whole time he's reading and responding to that text. So that's something we need to be very much aware of. Okay. Do I have to be in a bin to be trapped? No, I don't. Okay. So a lot of folks are storing grain on the ground. Okay. And those big tall piles, if somebody's walking up there, say they're putting on the tarp or getting things ready for that, they could become engulfed in that grain as well. So that's something that we work with the fire departments with how do we get somebody out of that situation. Gravity boxes are very, very difficult to work with, okay? And typically it's children that get trapped up in that gravity box. From the fire department side, sure, we can cut into the side of that gravity box to let the grain out, but if I've got a foot popping out, where is the body at? Is it leaning like up against the back wall, the side wall, or the wall in the rear to be able to do that? So I have a difficult time cutting, not knowing where that victim's at. So things we need to think about is not having kids up in those gravity boxes. Okay. And why does a farmer get in the bin in the first place? Well, the answer to that is the grain. It's going to get out of condition. So excess moisture in the stored grain can cause it to mold and to clump up. And as those get bigger and bigger and bigger, they're going to float down and they're going to land on the sump. Okay. 2 or 3 of those land on the sump, and how much grain's coming through? Not a whole lot. So that's where we run into issues and problems. So we want to make sure that the grain that we're putting into those bins has been dried down. About 14, 15% is what we're looking at. And, make sure that we're keeping an eye on that grain as it's stored in the bin and that we keep it in good condition. So if we take a look at fatalities by age, okay, I'm still hoping I'm chasing my wife at age 86, much less crawling into a bin. But I need to talk to you about that 2 and that 3-year-old. Okay, we're getting into the time of the year for pumpkin patches. Okay, and the folks that own the pumpkin patches want the parents to stay to buy the hot apple cider and the knickknacks. Back in my day, that used to be a swing set and a sandbox. Now, unfortunately, that sandbox has been replaced by a corn box. So let me ask you this: can a 2 or a 3-year-old tell the difference from corn that's in a corn box that's fun to play with and corn that's in a gravity flow wagon that can kill them? If they can't tell the difference, should we ever teach them to play in grain? Okay, so I'll get off my soapbox on that. Fatalities by month. So in a typical year, it starts to climb October, November, December, January. It falls off for a little bit and it goes back up in June. This year it went back up in June and it stayed up monthly. So there's still a lot of grain that's still stored and still out of condition that's going to need to be moved before the fall harvest season. So I really worry about our engulfments as we finish September and get into early October as folks are clearing out last year's grain and moving it out. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Jade now, and he's going to talk about Grain Bin Safety Week.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for the opportunity here. So just want to talk to you a little bit about Grain Bin Safety Week. It's a program that was initiated in 2014 as an annual campaign recurring the 3rd full week in February to promote grain bin safety in farms on farms and commercial grain handling facilities. You have to go back to about 2013. The nationwide risk management leadership team got together. We're discussing some losses that had happened on some commercial grain handling facilities, and felt that these losses were preventable. And that's where Nationwide decided to get involved and develop this program in connection with NECAS. Since 2014, we have provided 152 rescue tubes and training in 29 different states. And some good news out of that is we have had 4 successful rescues, and that continues to fuel our fire and make sure that we continue to push this program forward going forward. So you might ask, how can you get involved? There are multiple ways actually that you can get involved, and one of those being Nominate Your Fire Department contest. So how does this work? If you visit our website, which I'll talk about here shortly, it's January 1st through April 30th. We host a contest that you as a farmer, firefighter, local community patron can go on and nominate your local fire department to win a rescue tube and training. We also have an opportunity to designate a fire department that you know and want to fully fund that rescue tube. So those are a couple ways that we can get involved. As one of our sons of a rescued farmer said, they can only host so many pancake breakfasts. And so this is a way for Nationwide and NECAS to give back to well-deserving fire departments and local communities that obviously have farms near and far from them. Also, we also promote, as part of this, a lot of work at both the state and federal government levels, working with them to use Grain Bin Safety Week through the proclamation process. And today we have 10, 11 states that currently designate Grain Bin Safety Week, the 3rd full week in February, year after year, to help us promote our efforts and so forth. Lastly, as we go through it, is probably the most important piece of what we do within our committee and our program is the training and education. giving tubes to fire departments is fun and rewarding for us on one point, but obviously keeping farmers, children safe is our first and foremost, our important message that we want to try to get out. We continue to promote zero entry mentality, trying to keep farmers out of grain bins, but we know if and when they have to get in, how can we help them better understand the hazards that Dan discussed here today and make sure they do it safely and responsibly. So please go visit our website, www.thinkgrainbinsafety.com. There are a huge amount of articles, resources, videos, and tools. Some of those tools include the pre-harvest farming checklist. As many of you have started farming or will be here within the next few weeks, this is a good opportunity just to do a quick checklist, make sure things are in place, and you have talked with the family members, employees, and so forth to make sure that they're prepared as well. How to enter a grain bin safely. Again, Dan mentioned Lockout Tag Out, and those guidelines and procedures are there and available. And those are just a few examples, as well as some recorded webinars as well. So lastly, just want to help us join us the February 21st through the 27th, 2021 for Grain Bin Safety Week. And if you want more resources and better understanding of how you can get involved, whether that's in your local community with our sponsorship opportunities as part of Grain Bin Safety Week, please visit us at www.thinkgrainbinsafety.com and see how you can get involved. And we appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was incredibly informative. And of course, part of Dan's presentation was also scary, which is a good thing. To have a healthy fear of entering a grain bin, I think, is a very important issue that farmers should be aware of. We get busy, we get moving fast. We think, yeah, we can just jump in there and get that done by ourselves. And the next thing we know, someone's calling 911 or worse. So that's great news. Dan, I have one quick question for you. A comment has come up before to me. Those tubes are great, but you just can't hand over a set of tubes to a fire department, right? What is the training process for that? How long does that take? Is that just an afternoon? What do you have to do for that?
Yeah, typically when we're delivering the tubes and doing the training, it's a 4-hour process. So we do a 1-hour lecture with them, and then we'll spend the balance of the time outside working to show them how to use the tube, how to do the confined space permits. We also teach them how to cut holes in a bin. So if somebody's trapped completely down underneath the grain, we're going to need to relieve some of that grain out of there to be able to get them. One thing to remember is just because somebody's gone underneath the grain does not automatically mean it's a fatality. I did get to meet a gentleman down in Kansas who was trapped under 6 feet of soybeans for 3.5 hours, and he lived. He was wearing a stocking cap, and when the beans collapsed on him, the weight of the beans pushed the stocking cap over his mouth and his nose, and he didn't get the grain in his mouth and his nose, and he was able to continue breathing until the fire department was there to get him out. So those are some of the things that we work with the fire department. And, you know, we get the opportunity, we will sink people in the grain to their waist. And typically once the grain goes over the top of your knees, you can't move. So we'll go to the waist and then show them how to use the tube. You know, I always have folks saying, well, couldn't we trap somebody up to their chin? Absolutely, I could do that. But if I trap you to your waist and you can't move, I think I've proved my point. And why would I ever want to involve the respiratory system? Because remember, every time we breathe in and breathe out, that grain gets tighter. And, you know, we never want to do that in a practice situation.
Well, I think training is very important. And I think that you just don't buy a tube and think you're going to be deploying it that simply. And I think that was a message I wanted to convey. Jay, the National Grain Bin Safety Week, you've got, how many states that are doing it now? Is it 16, I think I heard, or that are locking that in?
Yes. So we continue to work with both the state and local governments and our folks internally to try to get more states on board. And so, yeah, if you have an opportunity in a state that wants to get involved, please let us know. We'd love to work with them.
Great. Well, I appreciate your time, gentlemen. You've been listening to the breakout session on grain bin safety at the Farm Progress Virtual Experience. Now that this is live, you can watch it again anytime you feel you can't want to. And this comment period will be over for this, but thank you very much for your time. And thanks to Jade and Dan for their part in this presentation.